Let us pray. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, send forth, we beseech thee, upon thy servants who bear office in this country, the spirit of charity and justice, that they may in all things walk before thee with a steadfast purpose and a single heart, and faithfully serve in their several offices, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Most gracious God, author of all good things, we humbly beseech thee for the Parliament of Barbados, especially the Senate at this time assembled, that thou would be pleased to direct and prosper all their counsels to the advancement of thy glory, the good of thy church, the safety, honor, and welfare of our people. All this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ, our most blessed Lord and Savior. Amen. And now let us say together the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And may the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with all now and forevermore. Amen.
The session is now in Senate. Turn it around, man. Upside down.
The Senate is now in session.
Yes, turn it around this morning.
Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Announcements by Your Honor the President.
To advise that I've heard from the following who will be absent today: Senators Adams, Wiggins, and Boyce.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the following documents: the 2018 annual report and financial statement of the Central Bank of Barbados, and the company's amendment regulations 2019.
Reports from select committees, questions to ministers, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the Senate on matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers or parliamentary secretaries, personal explanations, motions relating to the business or synod of the Senate and moved by a minister, introduction of bills.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of the Order of Freedom of Barbados Bill 2019 and move that it be read a first time.
The question is that the name of it. I'm looking for the name of the bill. Yes, thank you. The question is that the Order of Freedom of Barbados Bill 2019 be now read a first time. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Public business, order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Customs Amendment Number 3, Bill 2019.
Colleagues, Mr. President, this bill, the Customs Amendment Bill number 3, is a bill that goes a long way to ensuring many of the issues that we have been encountering for quite some time as a jurisdiction will now be addressed. Certainly, there's never a complete solution to any issue, but certainly one looks towards all endeavors that will allow a country to move forward in areas where from time to time we have had difficulties, we've had positives, but certainly we want to move this part of our country into a framework that certainly is much more modern and certainly takes into account many of the challenges that a new world gives to any small island jurisdiction. So the Customs Amendment Bill number 3 allows for things like the advanced passenger and cargo information. This information certainly allows people at all customs entry points, regardless of the type of entry point, to have advanced information on the travelers and advanced information on the type of cargo that comes into our country. It lists all of the passengers and crew in terms, so when we say passengers, it's not just the passengers that one would think of, whether it's a ship or aircraft, but the crew as well. They're all listed long before they reach our shores. And there are time frames that they must give in order for the relevant authorities to know that these people will be on our shores. One of those things certainly is, for example, the legislation provides 40 minutes for passengers coming from within our region and 24 hours, depending on where they're coming from outside of our domestic space. So there is a time limit and time frame that is given to allow the authorities to be able to clearly know who is coming. Of course, we use the JRCC. That's one of the entities that assist in the identification of individuals and in the security issues that are often raised when people or cargo are coming to our shores. The place of departure and the final destination of the cargo is also addressed in this legislation, and that's important. One has to know where the cargo is coming from. Oftentimes, people within the security sector will tell you that when they know where cargo is coming from, sometimes it alerts them to all types of things that they then go to look for. And certainly the place of departure and the place of final destination, because as most people are aware, oftentimes cargo may only be in transit. I don't know if I can use that word for cargo, but certainly it is not destined for our shores, but may only be here on a temporary basis. We may be acting almost as an entrepot port, and it's going on elsewhere. And so this legislation provides for that, not just for goods that are staying in Barbados, but also for goods that are not here except as on a temporary measure. It also provides for all of the other things that one looks for when one thinks of security. Things like the actual containers, the weight of the container before anything is put into it, and the weight of the container with the items in it that would have been weighed at the point of departure. Why is that important? Certainly all of the security people will tell you that's also an important factor. We see all the time things coming to our shores in all kinds of forms. You hear about things coming in metal, and they put guns in metal because all's metal, and so they believe that they're able to perhaps avoid detection. by throwing things together that seem to have like type
Circle.
features when it comes to the geology of what's inside of it. But certainly with the weight, that oftentimes will give those who are trying to detect these things the ability to do so. Now, so the gross weight, both ways, is an important feature that's addressed in this legislation. The legislation also goes on to, and as you know, there have been some improvements made at our ports of entry that would also assist with this legislation. The legislation is only one aspect, but certainly we have other improvements. I'm sure other people will speak on that, but scanners and the like that would then assist in some of the things that I just spoke about earlier in terms of the cargo and whether destined for here or for elsewhere. The legislation also provides penalties, because certainly anytime you have this type of act, one would know that there would clearly be penalties within it. And the penalties are meant to be strong penalties to act certainly as a deterrent, but also as a fitting penalty for those who would commit any of the offenses prescribed here. And so there are penalties for the non-submission of information, because clearly non-submission of information then makes the process of detection, security, safety, and all the other things that you're looking for a lot more difficult. So that penalty alone is $50,000 for non-submission of information. But then, of course, some people give information and the information is not accurate. It may be false, and may be done intentionally so in order to frustrate those being employed to keep us, Barbadians, and our ports of entry safe and secure. And that penalty is $10,000. I won't go through all of the different aspects of it, but these are some of the examples of what's contained within the legislation that clearly demonstrates that this legislation is looking at all of the different aspects of what we need to secure ourselves as a nation, and certainly to make our ports of entry as safe and as secure as can be. Now, the JRCC uses a lot of information that's given to them in advance for screening purposes. When I say screening purposes, I'm sure many people are wondering what are screening purposes, but certainly screening purposes is certainly for the passengers as well as the cargo and the crew. So long before people actually land on our shores, we know who's coming. That's one of the reasons why you would have seen that on departure from Barbados, there's no longer any need to fill out immigration form, because we know you're leaving as well. So certainly from that standpoint, the information that is sent in advance is used by the relevant entities for screening purposes. And so certainly if anyone is on any type of watch list, or we have any reason to suspect that cargo is coming from a particular destination where it may need additional screening, all that then is provided, because it's given ahead of time and in enough time for the relevant personnel to be able to do what is necessary. Now, you will see that a lot of legislation that comes today and a lot of legislation that was there before that has been amended, you will see that there's an electronic format required for some of it. Now, why is that there? For that's where the world is moving, and it's a lot more efficient. Obviously, if you have lots of bits and pieces of paper moving from place to place as paper, a file, and you got to go somewhere and then come back and then go somewhere and then come back, which would have been a methodology that would have been employed for many years, and it served us well. But now we are living in an electronic world, and this electronic world allows for us to be able to use the technology to make everything around us more efficient. So certainly the ports of entry will also be using electronic formatting in order for the receiving and transmitting of information, because certainly the speed at which that information is given then allows for them to fit within the guidelines of what the act is requiring. So if you're requiring people to send you something in 40 minutes, certainly can't be done by paper, because then that process may not then fall within the prescribed time. So the electronic format, as you can see, is also contained there in the legislation. Now, will the airports and the seaports benefit from this legislation? Of course they will. That goes without saying. You know, oftentimes our countries are criticized for not being expeditious in their reaction or application to things that need to be done to improve what occurs within their country. And they're often criticized sometimes when there's security or safety issues within their country. But certainly one must be proactive if you are serious about securing your borders in terms of what enters and what exits, certainly in terms of individuals, in terms of goods, in terms of items. So this Customs Amendment Act does just that. And many of the issues that one has heard and seen and read and viewed all over as to what some of the issues have been over the last few years are addressed here. And that's why this legislation is timely, it is important, and is an excellent piece of legislation. And I am hoping that all members will support it. And with those very few remarks, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'll have fewer words than the leader, but I want to draw a few things to the attention of the government as it relates to customs. But let me just address one issue that Senator Moore mentioned when she said that there's no need to fill out the card because you know who is leaving. That is not working. Trust me when I tell you that. Because just recently, the court's given an order that a child, my goddaughter, shouldn't leave the country because the parents were having some sort of dispute. And they made back up. And no, you didn't know she's leaving. And the court gave an order that she should not leave. She left 3 times and came back home last week, or before now. This is the 3rd time she left. And you know, on this last occasion, the officer said, but you know, she shouldn't be leaving the country, but she come back already, so, and let her go along. So the court, you don't have any physical person up there, and no one is either reviewing this information because she left 3 times. But both parents, mind you, because the parents had already settled their differences and is one big happy family again. But the order is still there. It's still on the computers in the system, and nobody noticed. So when they left, nobody noticed. They only noticed when the child came back that she shouldn't have left. So check that system. All right? But I want to talk about what's happening in customs generally. I don't know if Senator Moore will talk about the other one, that we would be dealt with it, Monday, but I will deal with that later on in my presentation. Customs officers at the airport, the ones who work in the baggage hall, they work every day of the year. 8 till 3, 3 till 10 the next day, and then 10 till 8. 10 the night, 8 in the morning, and then the next day they're back on at 8 o'clock. So part of every day of the year, these officers are at the airport. And some of them work there 4 years. It is grueling. When you consider also that there is no place where they can rest if there's no activity going on. They have to find a chair or something to sit on and lean back and make much of it. Sometimes some of them go in the car and lay down. But that is dangerous because the car park is poorly lit. And also, talking about the light in the car park, we have customs officers who detect drugs. They would have held some person with drugs and then they have to go outside and mix with the same people who they just seize their drugs. And they are parked in the same jam level with everybody else. Use the same entry and exit point. It is dangerous for those officers. Officers are abused and threatened, and nothing happens about it. One of these days, I hope that we don't have to, as a senator, we don't have to speak it, but I'm afraid that something dangerous is going to happen. I remember once I told the controller of customs, you ain't going to do nothing about this man until he kill a customs officer, you know. He didn't kill a... No, I thought another issue. Right? He didn't kill a customs officer, he killed somebody else. And now that they have done something about him, I'm not going into much more details than that. Every time I talk about things, people think I'm mad. I'm not mad. I work at the airport. I worked at 833 to 1098. But then the immigration I was an immigration officer. So the immigration split their shifts in half. So that when you have to work 10 o'clock at night, 8 in the morning, half the shift turns up. So that gives the immigration officers 2 days off. It doesn't happen for customs. To my certain knowledge, it was going on from 1980 because that's when it went. But it was happening before. So you imagine officers working 8, 9, 10 years at the airport and not a single day off unless they get sick or on vacation. That is not feasible. Next issue I want to touch, and it's going to be sensitive, and some people are going to be vexed. But recently, we've heard the Commissioner of Police claiming that guns have been coming through reports. I've asked him on more than one occasion to produce proof, because what all that is doing is to put people against customs officers, but not actual proof. Because the customs are telling you that these guns coming in fishing boats. People meet the fishermen out at sea and force them to bring guns, or else, because there's no security for the fishing boat. Fishing boats come and go as they please. Because let me tell you something. If you brought in a gun in your suitcase, it is scanned at the port of embarkation. So if it's leaving Miami, your suitcase is scanned by the American authorities before it goes on the airplane. Now, how can a gun get into that suitcase and come to Barbados? It's impossible. And then there's checking here when you get to Barbados. So it is virtually impossible for customs officers at the airport to allow the entry of guns through baggage. Right? But people keep blaming, and they're not looking at the real source. The officers tell you that this thing is happening with these fishing boats, but there is no method and they can't police that. So rather than police it, they hide it up and keep on putting the blame on customs officers. I know they are easy to, like they're barefoot hang load, as the business say, but they got to leave them alone and let them do their job. Because as a result of all of this nonsense going on, police have taken over customs at the airport. Police go into the customs area and decide who will be scanned. They have no authority in there. But, and worse yet, when customs officers check baggage and the passengers are going outside, the police stop them, carry them to the station, and one of its officers check them without any lawful authority, because the people are not accused of any crime, no report is made against them. They just randomly pick people and carry them to the police station. And people, scared, ain't know what to do, go to the police station. Then, there's nothing in the bag, so they let them go, and everybody's happy. But what that is doing, it is putting strain between the police officers and the customs officers. Because here you are a customs officer, you're a trusted security officer of this country, and you get police checking behind you every step you make. So why the boy checking behind police? You know? Because we go around the place and bad talk officers and customs, making it and trying to make them the scapegoats for everything that's going wrong in this area. The police have to come up to the arrival hall. They're not there. They're not supposed to be there. They're in the customs area. If I were a customs officer, when they come in, I would put them out. If they don't go, I would arrest them. I would arrest them for being in the customs area without necessary authority. You know? But I understand there's some memorandum of understanding now between police and customs. That is a bunch of nonsense. There's a Customs Act and there's a Police Act. And all they have to do is to follow the law, and you don't got a memorandum of understanding. That is foolishness. The reason why we have that, for the last 6 or 7 years, we had a controller of customs acting who never worked in customs until he became controller of customs. Knows nothing about customs, and all that person did was to destroy the customs department. That department was supposed to go into the bra, and she was supposed to make it fit to go into the bra, and she started destroying, doing what the last government was telling them to do. And all it has done is to weaken and decimate the customs. At one stage, and up to recently, we had 160 vacancies at customs. 160. There's more now. Because the stress killing customs officers are more dying. So there are more now. I take the premise to her when she says she's going to do something about it, but because of constraints, we can't do it all one time. But you need to do it, and to do it urgently. Because customs, the most revenue comes through the customs. So if you don't have the people to do the work, you can't blame the officers if they don't catch everything. We have situations at customs where you should have several officers working in the area, and sometimes you got one. So you have an officer doing the work, and you're supposed to have a supervisor who will check the work and make sure that it's done correctly. But no, the supervisor is doing the work and then checking it. That happens every day in customs now. We have outstations where sometimes one officer is there. And then the officer is supposed to check his own work. That don't work, sir. So when I do something and I check it, I write. So we are a penny wise and a pound foolish. You might save the cost of having an officer there, but you will lose millions because you don't have that additional officer. Even the other day I went to collect a barrel. I did not make myself known to the people that I was there. And I didn't go and say, hi guys, here, I went and I sat down and I waited. I spent 3 hours waiting for my barrel. And you want to know why? There are about 10 booths for customs officers to check the barrels. About 10. But there are 2 officers. 2. Only 2. I wanted to see, I wanted to experience myself, so I sat down and I watched and I said, what's going on. You wouldn't believe it. When I got there, I said, Senator, well, you don't come and tell you here, I said, I want to see what's going on. Thank you very much, but I wanted to see what's going on. I waited the entire time because I wanted to go through the experience for myself. Plus, nobody can fire me, so I can't work late. So I decided, well, I can spend the time. But what about the people who could get fired for not come and work early and that kind of thing? You have to leave it in there. And the amazing thing is, people blame customs. People are cursing the customs officers, I was just saying, people call them customs, saying the customs don't do enough in the customs and working. I sit and hear them. But it wasn't customs officers. You got, as a matter of fact, they had 25 people ahead of me. When I got there in the morning, 25. I got there early, so they had 25 ahead of me. And you can imagine, you have to check those barrels, because the barrel's deep. And you have to make sure that the things inside there, they ain't got the gun at the bottom. So you have to take out people's things. And people cursing and saying the customs dig them up. That's what they're supposed to do. But digging up takes time. But 2 officers, and you know what happened? Officer didn't go to lunch. Because if it had gone to lunch, it would have been 1. you know, and then if both of them go on a lunch, the place will shut down. This is unreasonable, and especially if you're asking customs officers to work. Customs is very short-staffed, and they're not given the facilities to work. For the facilities or the equipment. I might hear some customs officers they should have guns, but I'm not a gun person, so I would prefer that not to happen. But at least equip them with modern, as you're planning to do, modern equipment. I now want to move to victimization in the Customs Department. We have customs officers, if you run foul of the management, they take you and stick you in a hole and leave you there. They have no, one of the areas everybody talk about is our MCB. That's the punishment area. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to represent a customs officer who was accused of facilitating a person to get to the airport with cigarettes. The guard claimed that he checked the bag outside. He felt through the bags, and he felt something like cigarettes inside there. So when they put them through what the officer let the fellow go through, that means the officer didn't check to find cigarettes. And his guy's in trouble. I'm now questioning the guard, and I asked him, what, you really felt the cigarettes? He said, he doesn't know, but it felt like cigarettes to him. His experience for all these years he's working, that they felt like cigarettes to him. I asked him a few more questions, unrelated to anything at all. And then I said, what kind of suitcase the fellow had again? He told me one of these hard shell suitcases. I said, you feel tricked? But a man almost lost his job because people were there trying to set him up. And then they said, that's why I said, I asked the recording secretary to read back what he said, the first question I asked. He felt through the case. That officer now, because they didn't get the way, they stick him down in the harbor, they stick him down in our MCB, but nothing to do. And they say he can't get overtime. Overtime, not giving the customs officer overtime is a punishment for a lot of them. Because we have customs officers who have been at clerical officer level until just very recently, as much as 30 years. So the overtime is what helps them with their salary. And I have a document here that suggested what overtime. I'm not going to make it a document of the Senate, so don't worry, because I don't want to know everybody's business. I got a lot of goddaughters, don't worry. But, so when one officer can make $10,000 1 month in overtime, and the other fellow saying no there, and the comptroller says he ain't to get none, you know that is setting the officers against each other. I understand that they're about to change it in terms of comptroller because they have interviews recently for comptroller customs. That should have happened several years ago. While you are trying to destroy customs and keeping everybody temporary, and keeping them temporary so you'll keep them on edge. No, I'm not. I'm not blaming the current administration for that. The Prime Minister promised she will make the appointments, and we know here a few weeks ago, Senator Moore can tell you, we were at a meeting with her, and maybe pointed out the disparity. She said, we can get it done today, and it was done, yes. Thank you. Over 100 customs officers got upgraded. Thank you. You know? So I'm not blaming the Prime Minister. When she does things to get blamed for, I will blame her. Thank you. You know? So don't worry. Don't try to make me blame her for things that's not her fault. We try to make sure you don't do that on there so people think it's her. No, but what has been happening in terms of the appointments and promotions, as I said, there were no appointments in customs for how many years? I can't remember, no, because they were trying to get customs to go into the BRA, so they won't appoint anybody, hoping that the customs officers would get the appointment over by BRA and get the promotion. So some of the officers said, no, we ain't going to the BRA, because they recognize how dangerous it is to transition to these statutory boards when government form them. Because everything happened, a lot of people who gone over the statutory boards when government formed these statutory boards are in pain. They're crying every day, saying they're sorry to do this and they're sorry to do the next, but they're gone already. Hospitals, one great example. Every time I see nurses, they're telling me, I should have listened to you. I don't canvas. At least not in here. You know? So when the officers didn't want to go to the statutory board. Because what has happened? Some of those same officers, even though some of them got attracted by the higher income, and they were older and they figured the higher income would help improve their pension. And now that they have gone over the BRA and then finally retired, the Auditor General is saying that their pensions would be based on the salary they were getting back in 2014 as opposed to the salary that they're getting now. The Auditor General is mistaken. The BRA Act, Barbados Revenue Authority Act, says that you will, Section 10, don't just check it. It is clear as anything else. But he's not reading the act. He is saying to them, okay, your pension is based when you left the service. No, it says that if you leave the service and go over to BRA, your service will continue as though you had not left. That is what it says in the BRA Act. Your conditions of service remain the same. So one of your conditions of service is that your pension will be based on your last 3 years' salary, not the salary you were getting back in 2014, 2013, and 2012. Because your salary is the average, your pension is worked on the average of the last 3 years. Service. He is interpreting service to mean service back prior to 2014 when BRA was formed. So the people who work and got increased salaries are still fighting to get him to understand that my service continue as though I hadn't left the government service. That's what it says in the BRA Act. So officers are aware of these kind of things and they didn't want to go into BRA. And to force them to go over there, they made customs very unattractive. But thanks to people like the late Troy Harper, dedicated customs officer who fought for his workers, I don't know if that helped kill him, but he fought for customs officers to be united and stand up. And because of him, those officers are still public officers today. Almost single-handedly did it. With a little advice and assistance from you-know-who. I was only the advisor. So, Mr. President, I promised that it would be short, but I wanted to make sure that these things were put in place, and that the conditions for customs officers are greatly improved. I understand, sir, that there is a move afoot for customs officers to get lie detector tests. And people ask me what is my position on that. And my position on that is, I will advise them to go and take these lie detector tests immediately after the cabinet. When the cabinet take lie detector tests, I will advise all customs officers to follow suit, but not before. Because we are suggesting that customs officers got reasons, you know. Senators should take them. If you want me to take, I will take one now. But not one customs officer can take a lie detector test other than the one that's taking it now until the cabinet follows suit. Do not follow suit until they lead. They're going to lead by example. They can tell people, oh, we want you to take lie detector test, but we don't have to do them because we are as like Caesar's wife. Lead by example. If you want the customs officers and you want the police, you want everybody else to take lie detector test, you take them first. Show us the way. That's as simple as that. And I will sit down and strap them in the chair to get the lie detector test, but not before the example is set by the people who are making all these rules. If you feel that our people are so dishonest and so crooked, show them by example that you have nothing to worry about. I also want to talk about an experience I had on Monday. A customs guard was accused of something. Whatever it is irrelevant. And the comptroller of customs determined that that person should be suspended pending the outcome of the disciplinary matter, as is his right by the acting comptroller of customs, and in accordance with the disciplinary code in the public service. They summon the people to a meeting. This is a paper committal kind of thing. You get reports from the people, you look at them and determine, oh yes, this person has a case, ask him for the commission. You don't have to have this big meeting. But when I got there, because I was representing an individual who shouldn't need representation, but they said, you must come to this meeting, and she was afraid. I went to the meeting, only to find the director of finance there chairing the meeting. He has no authority in customs. He has no authority in the disciplinary proceedings in the public service, unless he's delegated by the commission.
Did they chase him out?
I tried, sir.
Well,
I tried. But everything now is going here where? His explanation is like Prime Minister sent him. Prime Minister can't send him nowhere. Don't mind here with that nonsense. Because the Prime Minister has no role in the disciplinary proceedings in the public service. Next thing you know, you will hear that the Governor General chastising people too. You know? Because everybody getting in the mix.
On a point of order, as I recall from my rules, we are not to use Her Excellency's name in this environment. So I would ask the Honourable Senator to refrain as he does what he does when he speaks, and to even withdraw his remarks and any reference to Her Excellency, the Governor General of Barbados. Sir, Mr. President.
If I were accusing the Governor General of something, I would. I said, next thing you know, that the Governor General, because everybody is breaching the rules, I said, the next thing you know, you might hear that the Governor General could call in people too.
Senator,
I don't really mean to interrupt the Honourable Senator, but I would prefer... Oh, good,
Just
thank
don't
you.
mention her at all. The office of Governor General has no place in these debates.
I'm not accusing the Governor General of anything. And all I was saying is
Not
that everybody's
not
getting in the
even by
mix.
way of illustration.
Right? I said everybody's getting in the mix. I am not saying she did anything. All I'm saying is that the whole system, now this is not only in customs, now there's in the entire public service.
He has to withdraw remarks before he continues.
I don't know there's anything for me to withdraw. I'm not withdrawing anything. All I am simply, I give an example. I could have said Senator Tate calling people. I could have said Senator Moore. I just picked a name. But people getting a bit hot under the collar. It is not my job to
But even by way of it.
I am making an event about anybody. If I had something to say, I would say. And I was talking about this disciplinary proceedings. The disciplinary proceedings are governed by rules in the public service. And you had people outside, because if you look, the Constitution at Section 94 provides that the Governor General, acting on the advice of the service commissions, responsible for discipline in the public service. I can't say that. That's the Constitution. Let me get some answer from the Governor General what? The Governor General is advised what action to take. The Governor General did not delegate those functions to the Director of Finance, so he can't carry them out. The Act, the Public Service Act, sets out at the third schedule how disciplinary proceedings are supposed to be done. So customs officers cannot be called in by anybody.
Mr. President, on another point of order, I would be grateful if the chair would rule on my point of order in relation to Senator Franklin's remarks in relation to Her Excellency, so that there is some kind of form and structure going on in this honorable house, please, sir.
I thought before referring to 34(6) of the standing orders of the Senate, I didn't refer to it specifically, but I thought I'd indicated to the Senator that the Governor General's name should not be, or office, should not be the substance of form any part of submission, even by way of illustration. But subsequently you went on to quote from legislation, as I understood it. So just refresh yourself, sir, on 34(6) of our standing orders.
Sir, there's no need for me to refresh myself. I am quoting Section 94 of the Constitution that says the Governor General, acting on advice of the Public Service Commission, can do A, B, or C.
Yes, sir.
That's what I'm saying. There's no offense to the public. That's the Constitution. That's what the Constitution says.
With all due respect, sir, the point I rose upon was when the Honourable Senator said, and I stand corrected, but he alluded to, the next thing you know, the Governor General going to be doing X, Y, Z, calling in people.
I thought we had passed that.
Well, there was no ruling on it, sir, and I stood on a point of order seeking your assistance in relation to the particular standing order that does not allow that type of behavior. If Senator Franklin is allowed to continue, it means that there has been no ruling from your,
Yes, but
from you,
the
sir.
subsequent reference was quoted from legislation.
Yes, but that specific one, sir, is the one that I was
Yeah, but
asking
we
that
have
he
passed
withdraw.
that with respect. We passed
Because
that.
as I was
We've
supposed to say, as
already
the court
pointed
pleases.
out to him how improper that is, and we've subsequently referred to the specific standing order. But the subsequent reference after that had to do with legislation.
It's not only legislation, it's the Constitution. And it's not casting any aspersions on the Governor General. It's a function of the Governor General. We will come in here, some days from now and move and speak about the Governor General being the Chancellor of the order. If you can't do that either, I don't know with these rules, you know.
Please continue, please continue.
I was talking about officers being punished unduly and being denied the opportunity to work in areas because somebody don't like them. And you can put, and there are others who will get overtime every day. Sometimes they get more overtime hours than they work in the whole month. They got some months where you get more overtime hours for some officers than you work in the entire month as a normal time. And because you offend or the management don't like you, they stick people in the hole. And it is not shared evenly. You know, it is a lot of victimization. And one thing I want to talk about, though, I almost forgot this. The officer who held the most drugs at the airport has now been transferred to the harbor shed for stamping documents. Experienced officer who zero in on these drugs and catch more than anybody else. The mover from the airport, the mover from that area. I don't know why. I don't know if they don't want her to catch them, but they put her to do mundane tasks, beginner's work, just stamping documents. I want to know why. I want to know why certain people have been removed. The most effective officers have been removed from the areas, their area of expertise, and put in areas where it's not even a challenge. All you got to stamp a document, pass you stamp. I can't call her name, but she's one of the best. And I'll take her out. Again, she is not one of the favorites in the place. So, by way of recapping, like I said, don't just know. One, I want the officers at the airport who work in the arrival hall to be treated like workers in the 21st century. You don't work every day. Part of every day of the year, 365 or 366, depending on where your is. They're at the airport. Not good. That type of management going on long. Other people at the airport have, that used to be the standard. That's what used to happen throughout the entire airport. But everybody else has changed back customs. Officers need time off, need time to be home with their families. We want parking also for customs officers who work at the airport and not have to be like outside children begging to get area to park, because when you have customs officers who do this dangerous work to themselves, because it's dangerous to them, and then have to go about and around the same passengers that they just checked, it can be dangerous. I want facilities where officers can have a little rest. When you work from 10 at night till 8 in the morning, you must be able to sit down and get a cup of coffee or something, or tea, or someplace to put a foot, a lounge, something. Officers have to go sit in the car to relax till when the airplane come in, or just somebody call me if a plane come down or something, if there's an emergency, come. In the 21st century in Barbados, people see customs officers walking on the road in their white shirts and looking so dapper and stuff. They don't know the kind of horrors that they go through just to make a living there. Right? We need the Prime Minister, who is Minister responsible for civil service, to make sure that we have more officers working in customs. It not only will leave the stress on the officers, but the revenue of the country will go up too, because they can't be everywhere at the same time. And you want it done fast, you know. But it can't be done fast when you got work that should be done by 3 people and only 1 person there to do it. So we need those things to be addressed, right? We need people to stop accusing customs officers of malpractices, people like the Commissioner of Police, if he has no proof. If he had proof that customs officers were doing these things, then he should arrest them. And if you arrest a customs officer that is doing these things, I support him. But they're sort of trying to give the impression that officers are all these bad things and they're bringing guns, they're loving guns and all kinds of stuff. It is only bringing the customs into disrepute, making people hate them more, because you know customs officers are like, or the tax collectors, the Bible tax collectors, everybody hated them. You follow Zacchaeus? Yes. You know nobody like he. That's customs officers. Because customs officers can see your goods and charge you for them, and people can be vexed. So they don't have a lot of friends in the general public when you're doing your work. you know? Those things, sir, I want addressed, and I want them addressed very urgently. And remember, sir, customs officers, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, customs officers will support the lie detector test when cabinet takes the lie detector first. I'm much obliged to you, sir.
Thank you. Senator Springer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to add my voice in support to this bill that would amend the Custom Act Cap 66 to provide for advanced cargo information. I believe that the senator who led off on the bill would have given a good description, some good insights as to what exactly this bill intends to do, this piece of technology intends to do in terms of enhancing the security of the ports of entry in Barbados, especially as it relates to cargo. Of course, many of us in here are aware that criminals, persons with criminal intent, have over the years devised more sophisticated ways of bringing things through the port. They have. And I believe any technology that aids in arresting this flow of illegal guns, illegal drugs, and what have you, anything illegal, through the ports, will all go well for Barbados as a whole and the collective security of Barbados. Of course, one does not have to look far to realize why the situation at the port would have gotten to the point that it's gotten to. We all know that we had an administration in here that sat down for 10 years and allowed the situation at the port to deteriorate to such a state that items were coming through the port at some point and were not even being scanned. And as a result of that, a lot of, I don't care what the senator on the other side said about the misrepresentation of customs officers in saying that many of the guns that we now see on our streets came through the port. In actual fact, they came out on some boat or something. It's amazed me that the senator is ready to believe a single story by some person, random person, but will want to challenge the view and the research of the police commissioner. But a random person that probably got caught with guns, probably a criminal, he would be willing to come in here and believe that person over the police commissioner. It's amazing. Sometimes the man amazes me. But I would prefer to believe the words of our commissioner over some random person who was caught with guns and come up with a better story than to say, which is something that most criminals would think to say, oh, somebody forced me to bring the guns in for them. But that, to each his own. But I want to focus not necessarily on the security of the port, because we have experts in here who will speak to the security of the port and speak to the sophistication of this new piece of technology and this new piece of legislation and all the other matters that would help to create this more resilient Barbados that we are working towards as a government. I want to speak to the guns that have made it through and the impact that those guns have had on our society, especially our young people. I'd like to focus on our young people. We've had a number of murders for the year. I think we're up to like 34 now, of which many of them were committed by guns or through gun violence. I grew up in Barbados all my life. I have never seen as much, to my memory, gun violence as I'm seeing in Barbados. And this is just the whirlwind of those 10 years of neglect, of allowing the port to operate in such a porous way that people could just funnel guns through the port with the greatest of ease. This is what we are seeing in the last couple months, the last year, 2 years, is a direct result of that. There are so many guns on our streets today that people in Barbados, young people, young children are becoming desensitized to gun violence. They are becoming desensitized to gun violence. I heard a young lady, it was on the radio, but I would have heard it on social media. And she was talking about gun violence in her community. I think it was her community, or maybe it was gun violence on a boat or something. But the way she was talking about it, it was like it was nothing to her. It's a young girl in school. It was nothing. She said she see these things on a regular. I think was the expression that she used. They have become insensitive to the fact that a person pulling a gun or removing a gun and firing at someone now is not even something worth talking about. And that is scary, that gun violence has become normalized in this country. Normalized. It has become, I believe, in many cases, the first course of action in terms of conflict resolution, which is unfortunate for some. There are persons who are quick to reach for a weapon, a gun, if they have one, rather than discuss things and work things out like we used to, maybe even challenge a person fighting by hand. They are quick to reach for a gun. And all of this is as a direct result of the amount of guns that have been allowed into this country. They are not made here. They had to have come from somewhere. And as I said before, my best bet is through our ports of entry. And I also want to make mention of the fact that gun violence has become normalized. It has become a first course of action. It's also become a source of trauma for many of our young people. Many of our young people, many of these acts of violence are witnessed by young people. And that has traumatized many of them. And we see the results of that in the schools. I like to talk about children in the schools because I was a teacher. So I have seen how it has had an impact on children in school in terms of their ability to learn, the ability to concentrate. I've also seen how it has impacted communities. In some communities, one person from one gap shoot somebody from the other gap, or from the other street, or from the same street, or from the same neighborhood, or on the same road. And the end result is that destroys families. Families that got along and live harmoniously in that community for years were driven apart, destroyed, friendships destroyed because of violence, because of gun violence. I've seen that, so it has that negative impact on communities as well. We often look at the economic impact of the port. We always look at the port, we think about security, we think about economics. We have to look at the social component of it. How having a porous border, not having certain things in place can result in sorry. How because of the negligence of the last administration, we have seen how guns that were allowed to flow freely into Barbados, the type of impact they're now having on our communities. And this is something that we don't usually link to the ports of entry. We don't link it to customs, but there's a direct nexus, direct link between what is happening in Barbados today and what happened in Barbados under the last administration over the last 10 years at the port. A direct link, and nobody can deny that. We can see that, it's clear. So I just want to add, because I know a lot of the focus will be on the technology and how efficient it is. But I just wanted to bring that social component into the conversation so persons will know that we in the communities are suffering as a direct result of what was allowed to occur at the port. And I will hope that as we go forward and we bring in all this technology, this new technology, modern technology, and we come in line with international standards, that we can see a reduction at some point to the number of guns on the street, and by extension, the number of gun violence or murders or such like, or violence or gun violence, because everyone does not result in a murder. But we see a reduction in those cases, of gun violence on our street. There's some countries where there's hardly any gun violence at all. In England, a big country like England, hardly any gun violence. You know? But in little Barbados, we having shootings every week. Certainly every month. No, there's something wrong, something seriously wrong. And I will want to see this addressed. And I hope that this piece of legislation, in fact, I'm pretty certain that this piece of legislation will go a long way in ensuring that there is some sort of reduction in the number of guns that we see on our street. And drugs too. I almost forgot about drugs. I focus on guns, but a lot of drugs too. And in fact, the matter is that a lot of the violence in Barbados is linked to the drug trade. And where there's drugs, there's a need to protect the drugs, because in fact, you cannot go to the police if you're into that type of business. If someone takes your stuff, you cannot go to the police and make a complaint. I mean, you could, but you'll probably be arrested. But you don't go to the police and make a complaint. You usually reach for your weapon and you deal with it in that manner. So that also drives the violence. So if we have a porous port of entry or border, we have a situation where we have drugs coming through the port with ease. Then that too would also funnel and fuel, the type of violence that we now see on our streets. Because the link is there. It's there in three ways. You either engage in violence because you're protecting your drugs. You engage in this maybe because you lost your drugs, or maybe because you want to take somebody else's drugs, or maybe because you want to acquire some drugs. All these are reasons why there's a link between drug use and violence. So I just want to, as I close, to reiterate the fact that don't only look at the economic and security component of it, but look at the social component of having safe ports of entry. Look at how it has impacted our communities, and how, unless we fix it now, the further impact that it can cause. And when you look at these things, how it has impacted our children, desensitized them to violence, normalize the idea of violence in communities, resulted in them being unable to regulate the aggression when it comes to conflict resolution. All these things are a direct result of too much gun violence in our communities. I want that we take these things into consideration, even as we draft more legislation going forward. And with those few words, I want to, once again, associate myself with the views of the senator on this side, and all the other senators who will support this piece of legislation, and also give this piece of legislation my full support. And with those few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged.
Thank you. I next recognize Senator Lisa Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to begin my remarks today, Mr. President, by expressing my own appreciation, and that I am sure of many others, for the work that has gone into the crafting of this item of legislation. I say that, Mr. President, because oftentimes in an area where I spend quite a bit of time, from time to time, an area I have some oversight for, the Bridgetown Port, we see about 500 workers, managers, dockers, tug masters, mariners, who are responsible for treating to the management of imports and exports by the sea on behalf of this country. Sometimes, Mr. President, when we are at home in our beds and we are in our homes with our families, these workers are toiling tirelessly inside the Bridgetown port at all hours of the night, ensuring that cargo is adequately discharged. Mr. President, they do their best with what they have. The challenge, Mr. President, is oftentimes that what they have is not what they need. And I want to start my comments there, Mr. President. Now, we talk for the purpose of the private sector very often about the challenges of doing business in Barbados. Many agencies, if you read the news, if you listen to anyone walking the street, or if you are engaged in any business yourself, you know that many representatives of the private sector, some of whom are in this room, express difficulties, grave difficulties with basic documentation, basic procedures, basic functioning and payment of fees that are still caught in a time long past. There is an indicator, Mr. President, in our doing business report that speaks to trading across borders and addresses the challenges that are specific to our ports of entry. And I want to spend some time today, Mr. President, talking about what that report has said about us in order to give context to why this item of legislation is timely. Perhaps I should say timely only in the sense that this administration is bringing it forward now, but it is past due, Mr. President. Of 190 countries, Mr. President, it gives me no pleasure to say that Barbados ranks at 132. But we got accustomed over 10 years thinking that rankings don't matter. I believe that is what was said. We were comfortable with what we now know was mediocrity. Well, we knew it then, but the government for sure, this government, knows what is mediocrity. And 132 of 190 was nothing to shout about. Mr. President, let's compare that with other economies in the region. Trinidad, a larger economy than we were, 130. St. Lucia was the highest ranked economy in that rankings at 90, Mr. President. Jamaica at 134, and we were 132. That is a moment of shame for our nation, Mr. President. But let's get a little bit more specific. I took the time to give some rankings across the region, across the developed economies, and across the Latin American Caribbean region. Time to export and time to import were the rankings that we scored most highly on. And I'm going to start there because if we look at those rankings and we think we scored most highly in those ones, when we look at the comparators and what the averages really should be, there is nothing to be proud about. Mr. President, on time to export in terms of hours, from Barbados it's 41 hours. In the Latin America and Caribbean region, it is 61.9. So we did quite well by the hemispheric average. But Mr. President, in developed economies, the average is 12.5. 12.5, nothing to celebrate there. Time to export, Mr. President, we are 74 hours to export. The Latin American region has an average of 79.1. But the OECD and the developed economies standard is 3.4 hours. There is nothing to celebrate, Mr. President. Where we did not score at all, and where we did not register at all, and there's even less to celebrate, Mr. President, is our export rankings. We ranked at 350, Mr. President. The developed country average is 139.1. The cost to export, I'm sorry, that's what that was, and the time to export is where we have a real issue, as if all of the others are not real issues. Mr. President, we rank at 104. The regional and hemispheric average is 62.6. And the developed economy average is 8.5. Mr. President, we have a problem. We have a very big problem with the management of cargo flows in and out of this country. So when we think about what that means, and when I talk about these rankings, what are we talking about in terms of volumes? 90% of everything that we consume, those of us in this room and those under the sound of my voice, is imported as a commodity or as a product, either by container, or what we call bulk cargo, or less than a container load through the ports of entry, either by air freight or sea freight. And I'm going to deal with the sea freight. We have just over 1.4 million tons of cargo handled in the Bridgetown port in the last year. Of that, that represents somewhere in the vicinity of about 110 20-foot equivalent containers. We know what 20-foot equivalent container looks like. We know a 20-foot container. We know a 40-foot container. Almost 110,000 of those containers are coming into Barbados and going back out because we're having inbound and outbound transactions taking place. Let's break that down by vessels, Mr. President, because this advanced cargo information system is directly corresponding to vessels. The number of vessels that called on the Deepwater Harbor, Mr. President, in the last year amounted to 549 in deep water cargo. In the shallow draft, Mr. President, we had 123 vessels calling on the Bridgetown port. In terms of personal effects and, in terms of cargo bulk handling, we had 9 vessels calling on the Bridgetown port. Personal effects, we handled about 45,000 pieces of personal effects cargo, Mr. President. So we're not talking about small amounts by our own standards, because those numbers represent every pencil, every piece of clothing for the most part, a significant percentage of our food, all of our construction materials, nearly everything that we consume, the cars we drive, the furniture that we have in our homes. Those constitute those numbers that I have just described. And so we're not talking only about the large manufacturers who are importing or those who are exporting. We're talking about every single Barbadian household, every single Barbadian consumer who is being affected by our ability, or at times inability, to service vessels, whether by air or by sea, and to handle cargo. Mr. President, the development of this advanced cargo information system attempts to treat with a significant part of that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we in the Bridgetown port have been doing to attempt to play our part. But before I do that, Mr. President, we are playing our part. And I heard the Honourable Senator Franklin, in many of his comments, he spoke about the constraints with the Customs Department. And I know that there are those constraints because we experience them every day. Mr. President, in December of 2014, the World Trade Organization, to which we are all bound, adopted a historic agreement. It was historic in that it captured for the first time in WTO history since it was established in the 1990s, something called an inbuilt mechanism for technical assistance and capacity building. Where you do not have the resources, that inability that I spoke to earlier, those occasions where we don't have all that we need, was for the first time in WTO history inbuilt into the agreement, Mr. President. Countries were invited December 2014 and into January 2015. The first country that signed the agreement was Hong Kong, followed by Singapore in January of 2015. Countries were invited to sign up to the agreement in the first instance and to indicate by way of 3 categories. Category A, those measures that you were underway with and implementing and did not need any assistance. Category B, those measures that you were underway with but could do with assistance, and those measures in category C where there was no provision at all for any kind of support. Mr. President, I have said that the Customs Department and all of the agencies in the port and all of those that deal with cargo have been constrained at times by the inability to have all that they need. Would it surprise any of us in this room, Mr. President, that from 2015, this country did not sign that historic agreement? This country ratified that historic agreement and submitted its TACB requirements in 2018, Mr. President, in January of 2018. That was not this administration. At the 11th hour on the eve of an election, the challenges that we were facing with our institutions managing almost 840 something ships in total being processed through our ports could not benefit from the technical assistance that cost this country nothing but will, Mr. President, nothing but a little interest Nothing but national duty. It took nothing from the Treasury, nothing from our public purse, nothing from our taxes, Mr. President, nothing but political will. And from 2015, Mr. President, January, but as early as December 2014 when Hong Kong signed, Barbados was one of the last countries to sign. And I'm going to say to you which countries also did not sign, because it's interesting to know what company we were keeping, Mr. President. I'm going to tell you the company that we kept in 2018. 2018, January, before the election. Central African Republic, Bolivia, Djibouti, Papua New Guinea, Cuba, Benin, Kuwait, Uganda, Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Cameroon. Mr. President, that is not Barbados' normal standard, Mr. President. We do better than that.
Yes, we do.
And I say, Mr. President, that it is okay for Senator Franklin to say that in one meeting with him and Senator Moore, our Prime Minister fixed an issue. But there's more that is being fixed, Mr. President, and that is one of the things that we are now working with under the leadership of the Ministry of Commerce to get this Trade Facilitation Committee up and running to treat to these very issues that we took 4 years and did nothing with. Mr. President, what kind of government would have access to an agreement, a historic agreement, that gave them support to enable our port workers, our customs officers, the officers functioning also in plant quarantine and environmental health, and all the ancillary agencies that function within a port community, Mr. President, to have access to additional resources that cost the country nothing and would do nothing about it, Mr. President. People don't like us to say where we were and why we are here, Mr. President, but that is a classic example of something that cannot be defended. Mr. President, that notwithstanding, the committee to function in this space to treat to these issues has now been set up and is functioning. Mr. President, under the World Customs Organization, Barbados was, I believe, the only country in the region, and maybe as far as the hemisphere, not to have implemented Asicuda++. One of the only countries, if the only country in the region, and possibly the only country in the hemisphere not to have instituted Asicuda++. Mr. President, despite the provision of support from one of our development partners, who in my own meetings with them as we have sought to treat some issues with regard to the port, have expressed grave concern that despite the provision of technical assistance, so in the first instance, they did not get on to the agreement. In the second instance, they signed on to the agreement and had not attempted to access the technical assistance. But even in the instance where technical assistance was given for the purpose of introducing the single window, which allowed all of the agencies to see the information online using the technology, it was implemented and it sat there for several years, Mr. President.
That's right.
We're not just talking about a simple matter of a new system being introduced. We're talking about, for the first time, taking the matter of bringing cargo and collecting revenues into the country by the horns, Mr. President, because it has been left to languish for too long, and bringing our agencies that treat to those matters into the 21st century in the third decade. Mr. President, I've said already that I have some familiarity with the institution, the company, the entity that deals with some of this cargo. And one of the things that excites us about this particular body of legislation is the fact that it provides us with advanced information. Now, Mr. President, it is no secret that Barbados has a multi-purpose port. It is no secret that, especially during cruise season, another member here may very well speak to some of those issues, but there is no challenge, there's no doubt that when we are in the middle of cruise season, we are battling for berthing space between cruise and cargo. Mr. President, the provision of information in advance using the cargo information system will greatly assist us in being able to schedule berthing calls between cargo ships and cruise ships, and also with the ability to discharge that cargo. On our side in the Bridgetown Port, Mr. President, we use a technology-based platform that provides us, and I can sit here in the Senate as I deliver my presentation, and I can open my phone using the technology, and I can see every item of cargo being discharged from every ship. I can tell you the rate at which it is being discharged, Mr. President. I can tell you if there are backlogs, Mr. President, inside the port, and the management of the port can see the same information, and they will trigger from wherever they are interventions that treat to those issues. The men and women who work in the port use this system extensively, and it enables us to be able to provide planning support for what happens there, and I want to commend them for the introduction of that system. We are now in preparation for the introduction of the ACES, expanding that even further and making that expansion available to all of the agencies which function in the port. We have just completed, Mr. President, and I'm pleased to say in this forum, a project under the umbrella of, it's called Lean Sigma 6. We have not been casual, Mr. President, about treating to these issues in the same way that others who went before us were. Mr. President, we heard people repeatedly talking about the port. The port. It is one of the easiest words to call, Mr. President, the port. The other day, I found myself in a situation where we were dealing with a matter, Mr. President, where someone made reference to me. It had nothing to do with the Bridgetown port. It wasn't even coming down there, but everything is the port. So, Mr. President, we don't shirk from the responsibility of dealing with things that people call the port. So we're not going to wait for anyone else to say to us, you need to treat to this matter. We attempt to be in front of it. And Mr. President, in March of this year, we started a project called the Lean Sigma 6, which we used to assess in Shed 4 and in the shallow draft shed and in the personal effects area, Shed 2. We looked at the entire process flows from ship arrival to discharge out through the gate, Mr. President, and we can tell you in great detail, without fear of contradiction, where the system failures are. We know where they're not port-related, Mr. President. We know where we have done our part, Mr. President. But we also know that the failures to access technical assistance and to intervene in the system in the ways that we have described over a number of years help to contribute to those system failures. And I'm pleased also to say that Prime Minister Motley, in her infinite wisdom and under her leadership, where she does not hesitate to intervene in a situation where there is a need to so do, we presented a bit of this to the members of the social partnership 3 Fridays ago. And under Prime Minister's instruction, a subcommittee of the social partnership has since been set up to treat to these matters, port, customs, and everything port-related, under the leadership of the minister in the Ministry of Finance and the minister with responsibility for maritime affairs who has oversight over the Bridgetown port. And that committee has met twice and will meet again on this Friday and is in the process of preparing to report back to the social partnership on both problems as a diagnostic tool, but also solutions for the purposes of recommendations, Mr. President. So we are getting in front of this. Mr. President, we also were one of the countries not signed on to another platform which helps to schedule ships at berth, those berthing calls that I described earlier. The IMO single window in Barbados we expect to be implemented within the next 2 months, Mr. President. We expect that with our technology platforms and our technology partners that we will be able to communicate with ships from the time they leave the point of origin. We are able to receive already now the full ship manifest and all of the container, the cargo information, and to treat with them in advance by planning how we deal with that, Mr. President. So this item of legislation that we are treating with, Mr. President, is not about if I pick up myself and I go through the airport with my suitcase and I go down to St. Lucia. This is not what we're talking about on its own, Mr. President. That is to indicate that you do not understand the system or that you do not understand, Mr. President, the scope of the legislation or what cargo management actually looks like. When you read the legislation, Mr. President, it talks about all of the actors who are involved in ships and container handling, including the consolidators who batch cargo on our behalf, including the customs brokers, and all of those parties who are involved, not in my suitcase management, Mr. President, but in the movement of cargo, whether by bulk or by container, or even LCL cargo, which is a less than container load. That, Mr. President, is the scope of this item of legislation. And I just want to make that clear. Mr. President, I don't want to go on much further than there, because I think that we are very clear in our minds, certainly on this side, of where we have been, where we are now, and most significantly, where we are going next. And with that in mind, Mr. President, I want to give my full and unequivocal support to the introduction of this piece of legislation. And I want to make it clear to all those who are listening that the scope of what we are dealing with is not a matter for any scale of business on its own. It is a matter that affects all of us. Mr. President, if I go to the supermarket today and I'm unable to find my favorite cereal, I'm unable to find my favorite yogurt, a significant amount of that time is as a result of our ability or inability to clear goods from the port if it is an imported product, Mr. President. The ability to see that cargo, to see the ships manifest, to be able to have the customs department see that manifest, flick it to the risk management system to be able to see if it is to be sent to the green line, to the red line, if it needs further inspection, is an important component of this. Mr. President, I want to wrap up on the following point, and it relates to the questions of security. Quite a bit has been said over many months on the issues relating to port security. Mr. President, Senator Franklin made reference to who should sign what and in what context, and I won't go into that, but what I can say is that as it relates to the port, our managers have led by example starting first, and I too will subject my own self as chairman of the board to the same process, so we are leading by example, Mr. President. I want also to say, Mr. President, that we have acquired the first of the new scanners. It is here on island in the port, and it is going to be adding significantly to our ability to scan cargo. But Mr. President, before we got there, because this is an administration that doesn't wait for final solutions before it moves, this is an administration that simultaneously also looks at mitigation strategy, because that's what you do with risk management. So we changed the orientation, Mr. President, of an entire port and how it functions, Mr. President, to ensure that when a ship docks on any one of those piers and cargo is being discharged from berth 4 through berth 5, which is normally where we discharge bulk cargo, or in a shallow draft, that we don't have to slow down the delivery of that cargo, certainly from our side, for the purpose of inspection. We have changed the orientation, Mr. President, so every piece of cargo is able to move and drive through the scanning capacity, so that in a short space of time, Mr. President, we move from 0% scanning capability as it was over the last 4 years, beginning May 2018, dating back, to 6% in the end of last year, Mr. President, to the point where we are now at today, 52% scanning, Mr. President. I want to say, when I say that region-wide, the average for scanning is 8%. This country, this Barbados, in this port, is now at 52%, Mr. President. We do not take the security of the people of this country lightly. It is a significant thing to treat to any of these issues, Mr. President, and we have to approach them with all seriousness. And when we see system failures, and we see system failures from time to time, when there are failings, Mr. President, and when equipment malfunctions, Mr. President, because there has not been a maintenance schedule, we will intervene, and we give that commitment to the people of Barbados on behalf of this administration. Mr. President, our ability to know in advance what is on a vessel our ability to know what is inside a container, our ability to know and to see and to scan what is on the inside of personal effects is going to be greatly enhanced by the introduction of the Advanced Cargo Information System. This system, Mr. President, is going to add great value also to the measures that we have already put in place, namely the expansion of Octopi, the Lean Sigma 6 methodology, which we are using, Mr. President, the expansion also of the same Octopi system, and the introduction imminently using best practice models that we have found in the port of Southampton, which is a leading turnaround port in Europe, and the port of Rotterdam, which is a leading turnaround port in the world, Mr. President. Those systems that we are now benchmarking against, the top of the pack, Mr. President, will take us away from where we have been in the last 10 years at the bottom of the pack. And with those few words, Mr. President, I am obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for affording me the opportunity to speak briefly on this bill. And I'm doing so because, as we have all recognized, it is a matter of national security and border security when we're talking about our customs. And it has implications for the social fabric of our country, as Senator Springer would have pointed out earlier. I cannot speak to any empirical data that will cause me to question the sentiments of the Commissioner of Police. Neither can I speak to any data that will cause me to question the integrity of our customs officers. In fact, I wish to commend them for the yeoman service they've been giving to this country in terms of the protection of our border in that area, given the paucity of resources and systems that would have been available to them at the time. I believe that their work should be commended, though we acknowledge that what they were working with would not have been as adequate as we would have liked it to be. Customs officers, I believe, are specialized officers in our government, and they're vital players in our border security and the protection of this land, and they ought to be treated with that level of importance and respect. I do welcome any legislation, any policy that seeks to assist such persons who have so serious an undertaking. I wish to thank government for the additional resources that they've been offering to our Customs Department. You've heard Senator Cummins speak just now of the new scanners at the port. And when I was listening to this debate, as it was carried out in the other place, the minister responsible spoke about the rationale for going to ASACI the world in terms of improvement of our efficiency and also the trade viability of the country. So I wish to commend those things. However, as I proceed, there are two passages of scripture I wish for us to hold in mind. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 8, which says, "And there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph." And Matthew 26 and verse 15, which simply says, "What will you give me if I deliver him to you?" And I want to couch my further comments along those lines as there's just a small query I have about this bill. The success of this bill will not be determined by how technologically savvy it is or the systems that we're putting in place, but by the social consciousness of those who are called to carry out these operations. And there are three areas I wish to speak to. The first one is morale. You'd have heard Senator Franklin speak about the plight of our customs officers and the conditions under which he has reported they've been working. I believe if we have officers of such importance to our national security, we must ensure that they're treated in the best way possible so that they can carry out their functions with the greatest of efficiency. When the debate was taking place in the other place, the leader of the opposition spoke to appointments within the system, that there were many persons who were not appointed and were just working and acting, and these can have implications on the morale of persons and how they carry out their job, how effectively they work. The second area we must pay attention to is competency. If we're moving to a new system, there'll also have to be the requisite training to ensure that persons are up to scratch in terms of where we would want our country to go and where the level we would want them to operate at. Again, I believe that the government has made some steps in this area, and I wish to commend them on that. But the third and perhaps most important area for me is civics. An understanding of one's role as a citizen of this country and what is required of the person who is expected to carry out this work. And here is where I wish for us to pay attention to those two passages of Scripture again, Exodus 1:8 and Matthew 26 and verse 15. Moving to a paperless system also requires us to move to a paperless mentality. I say this against the backdrop of what I believe most civil servants are very familiar with, the saying of having to tell someone, some superior, put it in writing. Put it in writing. I've pointed this out to encourage us to pay attention to the possibility of political interference in civil servants carrying out their work. And this is where I wish to just raise a question with regard to the bill that is before us. Section 34, the duty master or ship commander, master of a ship or aircraft, commander of an aircraft. There are some stipulations outlined there, and under 3410, the master or agent or cargo reporter who fails to comply with sections 2, 3, 4, 5, or 7 is guilty of an offense liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000. Or if he transmits incomplete or false data, he is liable to pay the comptroller $10,000. But then, in the amendment of section 34A2, where there's an amendment, the minister may by order waive any requirements of subsections 2, 4, or 5 of section 34, modify any data referred to in the first schedule, waive or modify any requirements of subsections 6 of section 34 with regard to the time required for submission. I just wanted to know under what circumstances the minister would be able to waive these things. What are the conditions? What is the intent of this portion of the legislation? Because remember, there may arise a Pharaoh who knows not Joseph. I'm not questioning the integrity of the current minister. We do not make laws for personalities. We make laws for positions. And while I believe our current minister should be held in the highest regard, and there's no question with regard to his integrity or his care for his work in public, I've heard bandied around within this chamber, and over the last year, the lost decade and the corruption of the past. There may arise a Pharaoh who knows not Joseph. In addition to that, one of the reasons why there's a sacrament of penance within the church is because we recognize that human beings are not perfect. And the very question asked by Judas in Matthew 26:15, I believe all of us ask at some point in time, what will you give me? And again, I wish to just ask my members on the other side, what is the intent of this portion of the law? Because it opens us up to a very dangerous thing that can become a precedent if we are not sure what we're dealing with here. Because as we know in our system, whether we wish to admit it or not, one of the things that we've always questioned in this country is campaign financing. And if somebody is bringing in something that they need to have in their business quickly, and I'm just speculating here, and I owe them a favor because they gave me a favor. These are questions that arise out of this legislation for me. And so I wish for us to pay close attention to this, and if there can be some clarification, I'm willing to hear it. But with those few words, I wish to thank you very much.
You wrap it up there? You wrap it up now? Senator Tony Moore?
Thank you, Mr. President. Quite a lot has been said on this particular amendment. And like Senator Rogers, I would want to focus my contribution this afternoon on the actual amendments before us. And by doing so, speak to two specific areas. In her opening, Honourable Senator Moore made specific reference to the reason behind the retention of advanced passenger information system by the JRCC. The JRCC is the Joint Regional Communications Center, where reporting by a master of a ship, a commander of an aircraft, or their agent may be done through the JRCC. And the rationale behind this is that it allows for the JRCC has the capacity to pick up a number of things, and information is able to get to us well ahead of time because they have their own system in place. However, my submission is slightly different because in addition to having the JRCC in place, it is my view, Deputy President, that this reporting arrangement should also be in place for Customs directly. The JRCC has its system, but I also have the view that Customs should have the arrangement remain in place where reports are made from the master of the ship, commander to the of an aircraft, or their agents to the Customs as well as the JRCC. Reason is, Customs should be in a position at all times to do their own risk analysis. And that risk analysis should be done independent of any other body. Otherwise, the Customs finds itself in a position where it is subject to any vulnerabilities within the system of the JRCC. No system is perfect. Customs being allowed, therefore, to do their own risk analysis, in addition to any that will be performed by the JRCC, which will then be reported to Customs as well, can only strengthen the existing system of risk analysis. So if we're talking about tightening up systems and improving security measures, the suggestion is not critical of the bill by suggesting that we should remove the requirement for JRCC reporting, but in addition to that, customs should retain some authenticity and have the capacity as well to do their own assessments and therefore put things in place specific for Barbados. I wonder too, in raising the other issue, only have 2 points for those who are looking at me, recognizing the hour. I also have difficulty, Deputy President, with the minister having power to waive requirements as under Section 34A2. I recognize I'm being corrected in circumstances where I know I'm right, so I'll continue. Deputy President, we are speaking so much this morning about the need to improve security. We have spoken so much in the past about the need to improve governance in circumstances where we talk about a lost decade and where there was a lack of governance and transparency. And like the Honourable Senator Rogers, I too am concerned that what we are saying in words is not always aligning to what we are also putting in words, because the issue of transparency is challenged when, notwithstanding something being as serious as having a fine of $50,000 attached to it, we are saying that a minister, a politician, can interfere. So I had the same reference as well being made to a system that is being exposed to political interference. A system that exposes politicians to accusations of political interference, even where there may be no political interference. I would have imagined that since we have become as good as we are at correcting things, we would have sought to depoliticize the system. Customs administration must, like other areas, must be freed of political interference. And Mr. President, I don't recognize political interference as being meted out only by politicians, because political interference may also be executed at the hands of the operatives of politicians as well. And we have seen that. Senator Franklin made reference to it when he spoke about the transition of customs to BRA. And there are still some operatives who are not satisfied with a pronouncement that the customs will not transition into a Barbados Revenue Authority, and are doing everything in their power to corrupt systems in such a way that will justify a point, perhaps, that a transition should have taken place, even as it relates to this very advanced cargo information system, something that was on stream to be implemented since the end of July. Today should have been the implementation day. So much has happened to counter any effort to have a system properly implemented, including lack of provisioning of equipment, basic equipment, software included, that will be necessary for the reform to take place. So, Mr. President, I'm suggesting that there is a need for complementary interventions. It is not sufficient to say we have this system now in place, an advanced cargo information system, so all that has been wrong before and all that we failed to do under WTO and whatever else will now be corrected when we take actions at the same time, not only not to train people properly, and that training is at all levels within the system, but when we are also creating further problems by bringing questions around transparency and governance of a very system that is intended to bring better governance. When this when these amendments were being proposed in another place, when they were being introduced, I was interested to hear that there will be some attempt in some areas to bring complementary interventions to boost security. For instance, where there are outposts meaning where you don't, customs doesn't only operate within the ports of entry, but where items are cleared outside of those ports of entries, that there would be attempt to improve the security in those areas where there will now be a commitment where those outposts exist to ensure that the same way down in the port scanning is being done and being raised to 52% with an ultimate objective of having 100% scanning, that at these outposts as well, they must have similar systems of security in place. Mr. President, it's my submission that that is one way of fixing it. But perhaps a better way of fixing it is by keeping port work within the ports and not taking it outside of the ports, where we have to expose the system to all other variations, let me put it that way, of the systems that we have in place. Then we will hear that it happened in the port, as the Honourable Senator Cummings was saying. So the point being made clearly, port work should be kept within the port, so that even as I may be aware, because when I wear another hat, I'm accustomed to information falling off a truck. Even where I may be aware that there may be applications right now before the relevant ministries for more outposts to be given approval, I hope that my urging in this simple message that port work should remain in the port will serve to advise the relevant bodies how they should treat to those applications. And finally, yes, finally, as we speak about complementary interventions, we must correct the issues that create environments that are conducive to breaches. Not only the one I spoke to when I spoke to the political interference that is now enshrined in the amendments based on the ability given to the minister, but we must ensure training. And I repeat it because although the Honourable Senator Rogers said it, and the other hat I wear, with the other hat I wear, it is important for me to say it because I also had it, the need for training and the need to boost morale. And I think that those two things are intricately linked, because we had a body of customs workers and customs guards over the years. They came even to another organization, institution that I am affiliated to. We formed an education committee. We went to the University of the Cave Hill campus, to their School of Continuing Studies. We engaged people from overseas because this body of customs workers and customs guards expressed the concern that they want to be trained. They were the ones calling for the updates to Asecuta. Why is it that they expect us to do all of these things with manpower shortages, not providing us with the technology, and on top of that, not providing us with the training? So this is a body of workers that has been made to feel demoralized, having taken proposals for training to a control of customs and having those proposals rejected because this isn't necessary. So when we speak about complementary interventions, when we talk about boosting security, when we talk about morale issues, when we talk about training issues, let's not see these therefore as isolated requirements, but let us see them as part of a multidimensional approach that is required. I hope that something I've said this afternoon, notwithstanding the fact that there are so many positives, so many good things as it relates to the amendments, that it will not fall on deaf ears, but it would be corrected. And I have an opportunity, I know, elsewhere to influence the training and the morale issues and so on. However, on those two fundamental issues of having passenger reporting information coming directly to customs and having the political interference as specified by Amendment 34A2, having those two things addressed so that we can advance on the other pluses that we envisage and recognize by the proposed amendments. Mr. President, I thank you.
Senator Moore, wind it up.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank all colleagues for their contribution to this debate. Just to say that this particular amendment certainly will strengthen the national security of our country. It will strengthen our borders. All of the items that Senator Cummings spoke about, things like Asakuda Plus, and the schedule of ships through the IMO single window and communications, as well as the scanners that are now in the port. These all allow for the strengthening of our security because it allows us to know what's entering our borders. Now, I know there's some of us that think that dangerous items come in a suitcase. You know, people pack the suitcase and say, let me throw my gun, Mr. President, in the suitcase and come along. Now, I'm sure there may be some people that do that, but I don't think that that is common. I don't think that as you're packing your toothbrush and your bar of soap, you throw the gun in the suitcase as well. I think most of the guns that come through our borders come through in a manner of stealth, where people try to hide them, as I said earlier, in things like other metal items so they're not detected, because I can't really imagine the gun packed next to the tie and the jacket. So maybe I might be wrong, I don't know, because I don't know. But from what I read, certainly most people who try to bring that type of contraband into Barbados, they try to bring it in undetected. And some of the things that you read about and you see on television or local media is people putting things in car equipment and car parts and things like fridges and stoves and other metal items. We've read that ourselves in our newspapers. But nevertheless, what the salient point is that these steps that are being taken are there to protect us as Barbadians. And certainly it is worth making that point. Now, like the rest of my colleagues, I too believe that the port with workers, and I'm not just talking about port workers, I'm talking about the whole gamut of port workers, immigration, customs, and the other port workers do a good job. In a previous life, I used to import a lot of things in for my business through the airport and the seaport. And I could say that they do a good job, and there's no perfect system of anything in life. But for certainly, I can say that I believe that they've all tried to go above and beyond in many instances to assist you because of the difficult environment that you work in a non-modern environment of a whole lot of paper. But now we're using these more technical solutions to our problem. I think it will also make their jobs a lot easier. And that too will also help with efficiency and productivity. And when you have a more efficient and a more productive system, it then lends to less stress for the workers and a much better environment and working conditions for them to get their jobs done. And I too would like to commend them for all that they've done over the years with what they have had. Now, the last thing that I want to say, Mr. President, as I wrap up very quickly, is the whole concern of Section 34A2, where people seem a little concerned about a minister being able to waive particular sections. And we know there's a sections 2, 4, and 5. So let me just deal with them so that there's no sort of confusion or cause for concern. Now, section 2, as you will read, deals with the cargo manifest, the bills of lading, and airway bills, etc. I won't go through all of them, but anyone who has imported items will know those are the manifesting of what you bring in, and so you want to see what people are bringing. You know, 10 bars or so, 26 chairs, whatever is in your manifest or on your bill of lading as you import your items. And of course, then section 4 and 5 is the advance information that we spoke about earlier, so I wouldn't belabor that point either, where that information goes to the JRCC, etc. But let us also remember we live in the Caribbean. And certainly I, like many Caribbean persons, have been on islands, where the islands have been more or less non-functional. No electricity, devastated. I've been there, so I know. No water. I can manage the no electricity, water. There's a bit of a problem, because, you know, the dark is fine, but water, you know. But when you are in these horrific scenarios, the last thing you want, so I want to tell you, when there are people bringing supplies in to help you, is where the bill of lading, you ain't got the manifest. So when the fishing boat comes from Barbados and goes to a neighboring island, and heaven forbid it would happen to us here in Barbados, and someone had to come to our assistance, we can't get the things offloaded. We can't get any assistance from people who may come to our assistance, the fisher folk, and so that has happened repeatedly here in the Eastern Caribbean and in the Western Caribbean as well, when we've had these situations. So if you don't have the ability to have a variance, and you only stick hard and fast to a rule, because that's the rule of law, we got to stick to it, and any variation is going to be a disaster, political interference. Oh, heaven, what is going to happen and befall our poor nation if we let that happen? Well, it is worse. It is worse if you can't offload cases of water. It is worse if you can't help people feed themselves in an instance of a disaster. And we've had so many examples in recent times because of global warming. So we would understand the need for a variance in legislation to accommodate these type of issues. So I know there's some level of disquiet, but the disquiet, fear not. This is there to assist individuals to make proper decisions when they are necessary. Because as perfect as we would want our existence to be, it is certainly not so. We are cognizant of what can befall not just our neighbors, but us as well. And so therefore, we need to be proactive in whatever policies and laws that we institute to take into any variance that may occur that may be deleterious to our citizens. And with those few words, Mr. President, I would like to move that you now, sorry. And now, Mr. President, with those few words, I would like to move that this bill now be read a second time.
Question is that the bill on consideration now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Take the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I now beg that you leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
Question is that I do now leave the chair. And the Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration in detail of the bill under consideration. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The Senate is now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1 to clause 5.
I beg to move that clause 1 to clause 5 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 to 5 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6 to Clause 10.
I beg to move that clause 6 to clause 10 stand part.
The question is that clauses 6 to 10 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 11 to Clause 15.
I beg to move that clause 11 to clause 15 stand part.
The question is that clause 11 to clause 15 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Schedule be the schedule to the bill.
This,
Beg to move that the schedule.
I now beg to move that the schedule be the schedule
To the bill. To the bill.
to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Report.
I beg to move that you do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman is reported to be the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
Question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the act do now pass and cited as the Customs Amendment Act. Cap. Number 3, 2019.
Question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. And the bill is now being passed. And the cited is the Customs Amendment number 3. I think we made the lunch, no? Move that we now suspended for 3:15. Suspended for 75 minutes. Move that we be now suspended.
Until 3:15.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we now be suspended for lunch or
3:15.
until 3:15.
Question is that this session be now suspended the next 75 minutes for lunch until 3:15. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and the session is now suspended.